I found the emails at 2 in the morning on Victoria's laptop. Divorce strategy, phase 2 was the subject line. My wife had spent months planning to take half of everything I'd built, with my own children as willing accomplices. The plan was surgical. Marcus would call for my removal as CEO. Grace would second the motion. Victoria would console me through the difficult transition, while positioning herself to control the company assets before filing for divorce. 12 investors were scheduled to witness my public humiliation the next morning. They thought they were attending a routine board meeting. They were actually watching my execution. But while Victoria slept peacefully beside me, dreaming of her $30 million payday, I was making 3 phone calls that would end her world. My name is Santiago Russell, and I built Meridian Manufacturing from nothing into a $31.2 million empire. By morning, she had nothing left to take from me, but I had been preparing for this day for 6 months. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not in that boardroom, but in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit, 1978. I was 16, working construction after school because my father drank away every paycheck he earned. My hands were already rough from concrete and steel. My back ached from lifting rebar twice my weight. Sweat stung my eyes every afternoon. The foreman called me college boy because I carried books in my work bag, but I made myself a promise standing on that job site, covered in mud and cement dust. I would build something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away. I met Maria at a diner near the construction site. She was studying accounting at night school, working double shifts to pay for books. Her fingers were stained with ink from carbon paper. Her eyes were tired but determined. We shared dreams over coffee and day-old donuts that cost 35 cents each. She believed in me before I believed in myself. We got married 3 years later in a small ceremony at St. Michael's Church. $67 for the reception in the church basement, folding chairs and store-bought cake. But we were rich in something more valuable. We were partners. We were builders. When Grace was born, Maria died from complications. I held my newborn daughter in one arm and signed the death certificate with the other. The doctor said sometimes these things just happen. That promise would become my biggest mistake. That night in the hospital, I made another promise. My children would never know poverty. They would never feel abandoned. They would have everything I couldn't give them. Every advantage, every opportunity, every comfort. I started Meridian Manufacturing in our garage with $3,000, and Maria's belief that quality would always win over quantity. I made custom metal fixtures for local businesses. Every weld was perfect. Every delivery was on time. Every customer came a reference. The kids grew up watching me work 16-hour days. Marcus would hand me tools while Grace organized my paperwork with her tiny fingers. They saw the sacrifice. They lived the struggle. But they also saw the gradual success. By 1995, we had 15 employees in a rented warehouse. By 2000, we had 85 workers in our own facility. By 2010, we employed over 400 people across 3 states. The garage became a factory. The factory became an empire. I taught Marcus the production floor, how to read blueprints, how to manage workers, how to solve problems with your hands and your brain. I showed Grace how numbers told stories, profit margins, customer satisfaction, employee retention. I wanted them to understand that success came from service, not entitlement. They learned well, too well. By their 20s, they could run circles around competitors twice their age. They spoke the language of business fluently. They commanded respect in board meetings and on factory floors. But somewhere along the way, they forgot who taught them that language. Then I met Victoria at the National Manufacturing Conference in 2016. She had an MBA from Northwestern and spoke confidently about operational efficiency to a room full of skeptical manufacturers. She understood profit margins and supply chain optimization. She could analyze financial statements like Maria used to analyze recipe costs. She was everything Maria wasn't: polished, educated, strategic. Where Maria had been warm and intuitive, Victoria was cool and analytical. Where Maria had built relationships through trust, Victoria built them through data. Marcus was 31, Grace was 28. They'd both struggled with losing their mother so young. When Victoria showed interest in our family business, they welcomed her warmth. She listened to their ideas, she validated their frustrations, she made them feel heard. She understood the business too well. Within 6 months, she was offering suggestions about our accounting systems. Within a year, she was offering solutions to problems I didn't know we had. Within 2 years, she was offering herself. We married in a small ceremony in 2018. The kids stood as witnesses, genuinely happy to see me with someone again. They said I'd been alone too long. They said Victoria brought new energy to our family. They said she understood what we were building. They were right about the energy. Victoria suggested modernizing our financial systems. She had the credentials. She had the vision. She had my trust. And she had something else I didn't recognize until too late. She had ambition that matched her intelligence. I signed the papers making Victoria Chief Financial Officer 6 months after our wedding. The board approved unanimously. She had the credentials, the experience, the vision. Every signature was an act of love. Marcus had earned his engineering degree and proved himself on the factory floor for 8 years. He could troubleshoot machinery problems that stumped our veteran technicians. He could design production improvements that increased efficiency by double digits. I signed him as Vice President of Operations. Grace completed her marketing degree and showed real talent for customer relationships. She could remember personal details about clients' families, their business challenges, their long-term goals. Under her guidance, customer retention improved from 73% to 91%. I signed her as Vice President of Marketing, and every act of love was documented. Victoria proposed restructuring our corporate bylaws for better decision-making efficiency. The lawyers prepared documents that seemed reasonable. 3 family members on the board of directors, 4 external investors who'd been with us for years, simplified proxy voting procedures to speed up routine decisions. I signed everything without reading the fine print. Why wouldn't I? These were my family members, my trusted advisors, people who had my best interests at heart. Victoria suggested I deserved to enjoy retirement while still providing guidance. You should play more golf, honey. Let us handle the day-to-day stress. You've earned the right to step back and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Marcus agreed enthusiastically. Dad, you've worked hard enough. Trust us to carry the load. We learned from the best teacher in the business. Grace nodded supportively. We want to make you proud. Time for us to prove everything you taught us was worth teaching. The legal framework was perfect. They just didn't understand who really controlled it. I started setting up trust funds for my children that same year, $2.3 million for each of them, designed to provide financial security while encouraging continued productivity. The trusts included a good moral character clause that seemed like standard legal language at the time. I bought Marcus a house as a wedding gift when he married his college girlfriend Sarah. $890,000 for a beautiful colonial in the best neighborhood in town. I co-signed the mortgage and provided the down payment. I wanted my son to have the stability I'd never known growing up. I paid for Grace's MBA at Wharton when she decided she needed advanced credentials. $350,000 over 2 years, including tuition, living expenses, and networking costs. I wanted my daughter to have every advantage in the business world. Victoria suggested that I guarantee several business expansion loans to demonstrate family commitment to growth, and the bank required personal guarantees from the primary shareholder for loans exceeding $5 million. I signed the paperwork gladly. We were expanding our manufacturing capacity, upgrading our equipment, investing in our future. I was making them comfortable, too comfortable. The changes happened gradually. Victoria would schedule strategic planning meetings during my golf afternoons. We didn't want to burden Santiago with routine operational discussions. He's earned the right to focus on the big picture. Marcus began making equipment purchases without consultation. Dad, you told us to use our judgment on anything under $50,000. This improves efficiency by 12%. Grace started committing to marketing campaigns without approval. The opportunity window was closing fast. I knew you'd want us to move quickly on profitable ventures. Every decision was reasonable. Every explanation was logical. Every signature was moving us closer to a cliff I couldn't see coming. The corporate restructuring continued throughout 2019 and 2020. Victoria recommended establishing a complex network of subsidiary LLCs to optimize tax efficiency and limit liability exposure. The legal structure involved Pinnacle Holdings as the primary entity, with 3 subsidiary companies controlling different aspects of our operations. I signed every document. Why wouldn't I? Victoria had an MBA in finance. The lawyers she hired came from prestigious firms. The accountants she recommended had decades of experience with manufacturing companies our size. Meanwhile, I was enjoying semi-retirement, playing golf 3 days a week, taking Victoria on Caribbean vacations, watching my children demonstrate competence and confidence in running daily operations. But something was shifting beneath the surface. Company meetings happened without me. Dad, we've got this handled. No need to waste your time on routine stuff. Key supplier negotiations occurred during my rest periods. Budget reviews took place while I was enjoying leisure time. I wasn't invited. I was managed. Victoria developed a language around my involvement that sounded respectful but felt dismissive. Let's not burden Santiago with these operational details. He prefers strategic oversight. Santiago trusts us to handle implementation while he focuses on vision. My administrative assistant was reassigned to help Victoria with urgent financial projects. My company credit card was suspended pending a routine security upgrade that never seemed to complete. My access to certain financial databases was temporarily restricted while systems were modernized. The isolation was gradual but systematic. I was being pushed toward the margins of my own company, but every legal document I'd signed contained protections they didn't understand. The complex structure Victoria had recommended actually concentrated control rather than distributing it. They were building their own prison without realizing it. By early 2021, I found myself excluded from most operational decisions. My office was relocated to make room for Grace's expanding marketing team. You'll love the new space, Dad. Better lighting, quieter environment, closer to the executive parking. They moved me to the corner office overlooking the parking lot instead of the production floor. Key employees started reporting to Marcus and Grace instead of me. We're streamlining communications, Dad. Everything still comes through you, just more efficiently through the chain of command. But nothing came through me anymore. I discovered email chains I wasn't included on, vendor contracts I hadn't signed, policy changes I hadn't approved, budget modifications I hadn't seen, equipment purchases I hadn't authorized. One email from Marcus to Grace made everything crystal clear. Keep Dad informed but not involved. He gets upset when decisions move too fast for his comfort level. They were managing me like a liability instead of respecting me as a leader. But I started keeping my own records. Screenshots of emails, copies of contracts, notes from conversations, photos of documents. I created a private file system that tracked every decision, every exclusion, every dismissive comment. They thought they were pushing out a tired old man. They had no idea they were creating evidence for their own destruction. The suggestion came during a family dinner at our house in March 2021. Victoria cooked my favorite meal, pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes. The same meal Maria used to make on Sundays. The same meal that reminded me of everything I'd lost and everything I was building to honor her memory. But this dinner would be different. This dinner would change everything. Santiago, Victoria said, passing the vegetables with a concerned expression, Marcus and I were discussing your health during our business meeting yesterday. My health was fine. I played golf 3 times a week with men half my age. My blood pressure was 120/80. My last physical showed a 62-year-old man in better shape than most 40-year-olds. But Victoria's tone suggested otherwise. You seem stressed lately, Grace added, cutting her pot roast into small pieces like she was feeding a child. All these questions about company decisions, all this concern about meetings and budgets. Marcus nodded gravely. Dad, you've carried this burden for 30 years. Maybe it's time to lighten the load before it affects your well-being. They spoke in careful, rehearsed phrases, like they'd practiced this conversation multiple times, like they'd prepared for my potential objections, like they'd already decided my fate. We think you should consider stepping back, Victoria continued, her voice gentle but firm. Take a real retirement, travel, enjoy your golden years without the stress of daily operations. Golden years at 62, like I was already in decline. Who would run the company? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. We would, Marcus said confidently, together, as a team, using everything you taught us over the years. As equal partners, Grace added, using your principles but adapting them to modern business realities. Victoria smiled warmly. You'd be chairman emeritus, honorary position, all the respect, none of the stress, all the legacy, none of the liability. The small cuts started to bleed. They were asking me to hand over my life's work voluntarily, with a smile, with gratitude for their concern about my declining health and their generous offer to relieve my burden. I looked around the table at these three people I'd loved, trusted, and given everything to. They stared back with expressions of loving concern and patient understanding, like they were talking to a confused elderly man who needed gentle guidance towards sensible decisions. This seems like something we should discuss with the board, I said carefully. Actually, Victoria said, appearing more confident now that I seemed receptive, we've already had preliminary conversations with several board members. They're very supportive of a leadership transition plan, already discussed with the board, without me. When? I asked. Over the past few months, Marcus said, during routine business discussions. Nothing formal, just gauging sentiment about succession planning. For months. They'd been planning my retirement for months, without including me in the conversation. We wanted to make sure the transition would be smooth, Grace explained. We didn't want to worry you with details until we had a clear path forward. They were rewriting history while I was still alive, erasing my authority while pretending to honor my contributions, managing my exit like they managed my daily exclusions. That night, something died inside me. The naive trust I'd maintained despite mounting evidence. The paternal forgiveness I'd extended despite repeated disrespect. The family loyalty I'd preserved despite systematic betrayal. Something else was born in its place, something colder, something smarter, something more dangerous than they could imagine. They wanted to play chess. I would show them grandmaster level. I called my attorney at 11:30 that night. Richard Crenshaw had handled my legal affairs for 15 years. He knew every structure, every clause, every protection I'd built into Meridian Manufacturing's corporate architecture. Richard, I need to review the ownership structure of Pinnacle Holdings and all subsidiary entities. Pinnacle Holdings was the shell company that controlled 73% of Meridian through a network of subsidiary LLCs. Victoria knew about Pinnacle's existence. She didn't know about the subsidiary ownership structure that gave me ultimate control, regardless of board composition. Santiago, is everything all right? It's almost midnight. I need to understand exactly what voting rights each family member has, what proxy authorities exist, what the board composition rules are, what control mechanisms protect majority shareholder interests. I'll have everything ready by 8 tomorrow morning. The second call went to Janet Morrison, my forensic accountant. Janet, I need a complete audit of company expenses for the past 18 months. Every credit card transaction, every reimbursement request, every travel expense, every vendor payment. What exactly am I looking for? Anything that violates our corporate policies. Any personal expenses charged to company accounts. Any purchases that don't serve legitimate business purposes. Document everything with receipts, dates, and supporting evidence. The third call went to David Chen, a private investigator I'd used for employee background checks. David, I need due diligence on some family members, financial records, personal activities, professional communications, business relationships. How deep do you want me to go? Deep enough to understand if they're planning something I should know about. deep enough to document any activities that might constitute breach of fiduciary duty. 3 phone calls would end their little coup. The next morning, I played the part perfectly. Confused but grateful father, tired but trusting patriarch, man ready to step aside for the next generation's superior wisdom and energy. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I told Victoria over breakfast. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time for me to step back and let younger minds handle modern challenges." Her eyes lit up with excitement and relief. "Really? You're seriously considering retirement?" "I'm considering a lot of things. Your concerns about my health, your confidence in Marcus and Grace's abilities, your vision for the company's future direction." Marcus and Grace came by the office that afternoon. We sat in my relocated corner office overlooking the parking lot instead of the production floor I'd designed. They presented their transition plan with PowerPoint slides and financial projections that looked suspiciously well prepared for a spontaneous suggestion. "We'll maintain all your core policies, Dad," Marcus said earnestly, "but with some strategic modernization to improve efficiency and competitiveness." "The company needs younger leadership," Grace added. "Fresh perspectives on old problems, new solutions for emerging challenges." I nodded thoughtfully and asked intelligent questions. I pretended to consider their suggestions seriously. I made notes on their timeline and transition strategies. "This seems very well thought out," I said finally. "Let me review everything with the board before making any final decisions." "Actually," Victoria said, appearing in my doorway with perfect timing, "we've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon to discuss the transition while everyone's schedules align and focus is sharp." Tomorrow. They weren't wasting any time. They thought they had everything planned perfectly. "All the board members will be there?" I asked innocently. "All 7 board members," Marcus confirmed, "plus our external advisors and financial consultants. We wanted to make sure everyone understands the company's future direction before any official announcements." 12 people total, Grace added. "We wanted complete transparency and full stakeholder buy-in for such an important decision. 12 witnesses to my assassination." "Perfect," I said with a smile. "I'll prepare my remarks and gather any relevant documents for the presentation." They exchanged glances of satisfaction and relief. Their plan was proceeding exactly as they'd hoped. The old man was cooperating. The transition would be smooth. The coup would be bloodless. "We really appreciate your openness to this, Dad," Marcus said, shaking my hand warmly. "We know this isn't easy, but we think it's the right thing for everyone involved." "We love you," Grace said, hugging me tightly. "We want what's best for you and for the company you built." Victoria kissed my cheek gently. "You've earned the right to relax and enjoy life without business stress. We'll take good care of everything." After they left, I sat in my corner office overlooking the parking lot and reviewed the documents Richard had prepared. Corporate bylaws, subsidiary agreements, voting trust arrangements, control mechanisms, the legal architecture of Meridian Manufacturing. They thought they knew the board composition. They thought they understood the ownership structure. They thought they had secured enough votes to remove me. They knew nothing, but they had no idea what was coming. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. They had no idea that their perfectly planned coup was about to become their perfectly documented destruction. The boardroom at Meridian Manufacturing held exactly 14 people around the mahogany conference table Maria and I had chosen 20 years ago. Hand-selected cherry wood from a family-owned mill in North Carolina. Crafted by artisans who understood the difference between furniture and legacy. 12 investors and advisors sat in their usual spots, reviewing agenda items they'd received 24 hours earlier. Victoria, Marcus, and Grace sat together on the right side of the table, looking confident and prepared. Their PowerPoint presentation was loaded. Their talking points were rehearsed. Their coup was ready. I sat alone at the head of the table where I'd sat for every major decision in company history, where I'd announced our first $1 million year, where I'd celebrated our 100th employee, where I'd mourned the economic downturns and celebrated the recoveries. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Marcus began, standing confidently and addressing the room like he was already in charge. We've called this meeting to discuss the company's leadership transition strategy. My heart rate stayed steady. My breathing remained controlled, but my hands felt cold against the polished wood of the table Maria had loved. Dad has been considering retirement, Grace continued, her voice professional but warm. We believe this is the optimal time for new leadership to guide Meridian into the next phase of sustainable growth. The investors listened politely. These were people I'd worked with for years, people who'd watched me build this company from a garage operation to a $30 million enterprise, people who'd made significant returns on their investments in my vision and execution. Victoria stood up with a folder full of documents and charts. We've prepared a comprehensive transition plan that honors Santiago's legacy while positioning Meridian for continued success in an increasingly competitive marketplace. What would you do if your own family betrayed you in front of everyone? Would you fight back or walk away? Let me know in the comments. Then Marcus stood up, looked directly at me with the same confidence I'd admired when he was solving production problems, and delivered the words that ended our relationship forever. Dad's vision is outdated. We need modern leadership for modern challenges. We're calling for a vote of no confidence in Santiago Russell as Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Manufacturing. The room went silent. 12 sets of eyes turned toward me, waiting for my response, waiting to see if the old man would fight or surrender, waiting to witness either a graceful transition or a family meltdown. Grace seconded the motion without hesitation. For the good of the company and out of respect for Dad's remarkable legacy, we believe it's time for new leadership. Victoria nodded approvingly. The transition plan we've prepared ensures continuity of operations while bringing fresh energy to strategic decision-making. 12 witnesses to my assassination. I felt every heartbeat in my chest, every breath in my lungs, every movement of blood through my veins. The conference room seemed smaller, the air thicker, the lighting harsher, but my voice remained steady when I spoke. Interesting proposition. I'll certainly consider your recommendations very carefully. I smiled at my children and my wife, the same smile I'd given them at Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, and wedding days. The smile of a father who loved them more than his own life. They smiled back, relieved that I was taking their betrayal so gracefully, pleased that the transition would be smooth and dignified, confident that they'd played their cards perfectly. But they had no idea what they'd just done. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. They had no idea that their perfectly executed coup was about to become their perfectly documented destruction. The vote was scheduled for the following week. 7 days to consider the proposal and consult with advisors. 7 days for them to celebrate their victory and plan their new leadership structure. 7 days for me to notify key stakeholders and prepare for a smooth transition. 7 days for me to end their world. Richard Crenshaw arrived at my house that evening with 3 boxes of legal documents. Santiago, you might want to sit down before we review these ownership structures. We spread the papers across my dining room table. Corporate bylaws, subsidiary agreements, voting trust arrangements, shell company documentation, the complete legal architecture of Meridian Manufacturing. They don't understand the structure, Richard said, pointing to organizational charts and ownership diagrams. Pinnacle Holdings controls 73% of Meridian through subsidiary ownership in 4 separate LLCs. You control Pinnacle Holdings through your personal trust established in 2018. What about the board composition they're so confident about? Richard smiled grimly. 7 board members total, but 3 of those seats are controlled by Pinnacle Holdings subsidiaries that report directly to you. You can replace those members at any time with 48 hours notice. And then the proxy voting arrangements that Victoria recommended? Victoria has proxy authority over day-to-day financial operations. Marcus and Grace have proxy authority over their specific divisional responsibilities, but major decisions, like leadership changes, ownership transfers, or capital restructuring, require approval from the controlling shareholder, which is you, through Pinnacle Holdings, through the subsidiaries they think are independent, but actually aren't. They thought they knew the board. They thought they understood the voting structure. They thought they had secured enough support to remove me. They knew nothing. Janet Morrison called an hour later with her forensic accounting report. Santiago, you need to see these expense patterns. The numbers are absolutely staggering. The numbers were staggering indeed. Victoria's business travel over 18 months included 11 trips to 5-star resorts with no documented business purpose. Marcus's company credit card showed personal purchases totaling $43,000. Furniture for his house, gifts for his wife, vacation expenses for family trips. Grace's marketing budget included spa retreats, shopping excursions, and resort fees for personal vacations disguised as client entertainment, with no client attendance records. They had been stealing, systematically, confidently, extensively. Now they would pay it back. David Chen's private investigator report arrived by email at 10:30 that night. 37 pages of surveillance, financial records, communication intercepts, and behavioral analysis. The most damaging evidence was a series of text messages between Marcus and Grace from 6 weeks earlier. Dad's getting suspicious about the meetings. B says we need to move faster on the transition. Think he'll fight it? Not if we do it right. He loves us too much to make a scene. Every legal document they had signed had been a trap. Every signature I'd provided had been bait. Every structural change they had recommended had actually concentrated control in my hands. That night, something died inside me completely. The naive father who'd believed family meant loyalty, the generous patriarch who'd confused love with respect, the trusting founder who'd mistaken manipulation for modernization. Something else was born in its place. I stopped being their father. I became their opponent, and they were about to learn the difference. I spent the next 6 hours reviewing every document, every contract, every agreement we'd signed over the past 3 years. The complex corporate structure Victoria had recommended, the trust fund arrangements I'd established for the children, the employment agreements defining their roles and responsibilities. Everything was interconnected. Everything included protective clauses. Everything gave me ultimate authority disguised as family generosity. The trust funds included good moral character provisions that allowed me to freeze distributions for documented theft, fraud, or breach of fiduciary duty. The employment agreements included immediate termination clauses for violation of corporate policies. The mortgage guarantees I'd provided could be called immediately upon termination for cause. Every signature I'd provided had been a chess move in a game they didn't realize they were playing. At 3 a.m, I called Richard back. I want you to prepare termination letters for all 3 family members, effective immediately upon my authorization. Include documentation of policy violations, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of corporate assets. Santiago, are you sure about this? This will destroy them financially. They tried to destroy me professionally. The difference is that I built this company with my own hands. They built nothing except a lifestyle funded by my generosity. What about the board meeting? Let them have their vote. Let them think they've won. Let them celebrate their coup. I made 3 phone calls that would end their little rebellion. But first, they needed to commit to their betrayal publicly and completely. The morning of the board meeting, I arrived at the office early and completed the final preparations for their destruction. Richard had prepared all the legal documentation. Janet had compiled comprehensive evidence of financial misconduct. David had organized surveillance reports and communication evidence. Everything was ready. Victoria found me in the conference room at 7:30 arranging documents for the meeting. Santiago, I hope you're not planning to make this difficult. The transition will benefit everyone, including you. Some things can't be rushed, I said calmly. Marcus and Grace arrived together, looking nervous but determined. Dad, we hope you understand that this decision comes from love and respect for everything you've built. I understand perfectly, I replied. The board members filed in at exactly 8 o'clock. All 7 of them, plus Janet Morrison as financial advisor, Richard Crenshaw as legal counsel, and David Chen as corporate security consultant. 12 witnesses to their complete and total destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and professional. Before we address the proposed leadership transition, we need to discuss some serious irregularities in corporate management that have come to my attention. I placed Janet's forensic accounting report on the table. $680,000 in questionable expenses over 18 months. Victoria's face went pale. Santiago, what is this? Your travel expenses to luxury resorts for non-existent business meetings. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Their celebration was about to become their funeral. Marcus tried to interrupt. Dad, I can explain those charges. Your personal purchases on company credit cards. Furniture for your house. Electronics for your family. Vacation expenses charged to operational budgets. Grace started crying. Dad, please, let us explain. Your marketing budget includes spa treatments, shopping excursions, and resort fees for personal vacations disguised as client entertainment with no documented client participation. I turned to the board members, my voice remaining calm and professional. These three individuals have systematically violated their fiduciary duty to this company. They have stolen corporate assets for personal benefit. They have betrayed the trust of shareholders and employees. Richard stood up and addressed the room. Furthermore, they have attempted to orchestrate an illegal coup against the rightful controlling shareholder through misrepresentation of voting authority and corporate structure. Victoria, Janet added, your financial reports to the board omitted disclosure of these expense irregularities, which constitutes securities fraud under federal law. Victoria found her voice. This is vindictive. This is cruel. This is revenge for a legitimate business proposal. This is legal, I replied. This is documented. This is the consequence of betrayal disguised as modernization. The board voted unanimously for immediate termination with cause. No severance, no benefits, no recommendations. Security escorted them from the building within 30 minutes. But the termination was just the beginning of their education about consequences. They wanted to run the company. Now they'd run from it. But they still had no idea how completely I'd anticipated their betrayal. They still had no idea how systematically they'd destroyed themselves through their own greed and arrogance. Richard continued with the legal consequences. Victoria, your employment agreement includes a morals clause, specifically prohibiting theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. These documented violations constitute grounds for immediate forfeiture of all deferred compensation, stock options, and retirement benefits. Her company stock options, worthless. Her deferred compensation package, forfeited. Her severance agreement, void. Marcus and Grace, Janet announced, your trust funds were established with good moral character clauses that specifically prohibit theft from family business interests. The documented evidence of expense fraud violates those provisions. $2.3 million per child. Frozen indefinitely pending legal resolution. Furthermore, David Chen added, your personal guarantees on company-backed mortgages are now in default due to termination for cause under corporate policy violations. Marcus's $890,000 house, 30 days to pay in full or face foreclosure proceedings. Grace's luxury condominium downtown, same terms, same timeline, same consequences. There's more, Richard continued methodically. Your employment agreements include 18-month non-compete clauses that prevent you from working in the manufacturing industry anywhere in the United States. Your intellectual property agreements assign all business innovations and processes to Meridian Manufacturing. They couldn't work in their profession. They couldn't compete with the company they'd tried to steal. They couldn't even use the knowledge and experience they'd gained here to build something elsewhere. Victoria stood up, trembling with rage and panic. This is vindictive. This is excessive. This is designed to destroy us. This is legal, I repeated. This is proportional. This is the natural consequence of attempting to steal my life's work through fraud and betrayal. They had lived beyond their means on stolen money. Now they'd face the consequences of their choices. But there was still more they hadn't discovered. David Chen opened his investigation file and began reading from surveillance reports. The planning for this coup began 8 months ago, he announced. Text messages between Marcus and Grace discussing removing Dad from operations. Email chains about modernizing leadership structure. Financial projections that assume Santiago's complete absence from the company. The board members looked stunned. This wasn't a spontaneous business proposal motivated by concern for my health. This was a calculated betrayal, planned and executed over months. Victoria, David continued, your personal communications include discussions with competitors about potential acquisition opportunities once family leadership was modernized. She had been planning to sell my life's work to our competitors. Not just steal control, but eliminate the company entirely. Furthermore, he said, financial records show a pattern of increasing personal expenses charged to corporate accounts, suggesting systematic preparation for lifestyle maintenance after anticipated termination of employment. They had been living like owners while planning to remove the actual owner, spending money they planned to steal legally through corporate manipulation. Marcus tried one desperate appeal. Dad, we're family. We made mistakes, but we're still your children. This will destroy us completely. I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught to use tools, the young man I'd trusted with operational responsibility, the adult I'd prepared to inherit everything, and felt nothing but cold emptiness. You stopped being my family when you tried to steal my life's work. You stopped being my children when you chose greed over gratitude. The woman who wanted to take everything would leave with nothing. The meeting ended at 9:15. Security escorted them from the building permanently. The next phase required surgical precision, and I spent 3 days restructuring Meridian's leadership with external consultants and professional managers. People who understood manufacturing but had no family connections to complicate their judgment. People who valued competence over nepotism. Financial executives who'd built their reputations through transparency rather than manipulation. Operations managers who'd earned their positions through performance rather than inheritance. Marketing directors who understood customer service rather than personal entitlement. People who couldn't be bought. People who couldn't be manipulated. People who respected the difference between earning authority and assuming it. The company's reputation remained intact throughout the transition. Our employees kept their jobs and received assurance about continued stability. Our customers saw no interruption in service quality or delivery schedules. The business survived and prospered. The betrayers did not. But the legal consequences were just beginning to compound. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into the embezzlement charges based on our documented evidence. The IRS began auditing their personal tax returns for unreported income from corporate expense reimbursements. Civil litigation sought full restitution plus punitive damages for breach of fiduciary duty. Asset recovery proceedings began claiming everything they couldn't prove they'd purchased with legitimately earned money. Marcus lost his house within 60 days. Grace lost her condominium within 90 days. Victoria declared personal bankruptcy within 4 months, but still faced criminal prosecution for securities fraud. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page of the business section. Manufacturing family coup fails spectacularly. The industry publications analyzed it as a case study in corporate governance and family business succession planning. They had wanted public respect for their business acumen. They got public humiliation for their criminal behavior. But I was done building empires for ungrateful heirs who confused inheritance with achievement. I called another meeting with Richard Crenshaw to discuss the company's future. I want to explore sale options, not to corporate buyers, but to the people who actually built this company with me. You mean the employees? I mean an employee stock ownership plan. The 850 people who showed up every day, who solved problems without stealing credit, who built quality products without cutting corners. Richard reviewed the financials. The company's worth $31.2 million in current market conditions, assuming continued operational performance. I want it sold to an employee ownership trust. Give the people who created this value the opportunity to benefit from its continued success. What about your personal proceeds from the sale? 60% goes to the employee retirement fund. 40% goes to the Maria Santiago Foundation for Cancer Research. Richard looked surprised. And your personal compensation for 30 years of building this company? Nothing. I don't want their money. I wanted my dignity back. I wanted to prove that respect can't be stolen, only earned. The paperwork took 6 weeks to complete. The employee notification meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the main production facility. 850 people gathered to learn that they would become owners of the company they'd helped build through their daily dedication. The trust structure protected them from future corporate raiders. The profit-sharing plan ensured their loyalty would be rewarded with financial benefits. The governance model prevented any individual from accumulating dangerous concentrations of power. I was walking away from everything, but taking what mattered most. Maria's dream had always been simple: build something that would outlast us both, help people provide for their families through honest work, create value through service rather than exploitation or manipulation. The employee ownership structure honored that dream perfectly. The workers who'd sweated alongside me would benefit from the company's success. The families who'd supported our growth would share in our prosperity. The community that had welcomed our business would continue benefiting from stable employment. That was worth more than $31 million. That was worth more than revenge against ungrateful children. That was worth more than maintaining control over people who'd rejected my leadership. The transition ceremony was held in the main production facility on a Friday afternoon. 850 employees gathered around the machinery they operated daily, wearing the same work clothes they'd worn when I started 30 years earlier. I spoke for 10 minutes about Maria's vision, about the importance of honest work, about the difference between building something and inheriting something. Then I handed operational control to the employee-elected board of directors. The applause lasted for 5 minutes. Grown men cried. Women hugged each other. Families who'd worked here for multiple generations understood they now owned part of something permanent. Some of you are probably thinking I went too far. Others are cheering. Which side are you on? Drop a comment and let me know. But there was one final message I needed to send to my former family. One last lesson about the difference between love and respect, between inheritance and achievement, between family loyalty and personal character. A message they would receive, but never be able to answer. 6 months later, I was living in a small cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Northern California. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen table that seated 2 people, and windows that faced the endless horizon. The cottage cost less than Victoria's monthly spa treatments had cost the company, but it provided something my mansion had never offered: complete peace. No business phone calls, no family drama, no betrayal disguised as love, just the sound of waves breaking against rocks and seagulls calling to each other at dawn. I spent my mornings reading books I'd never had time for during 30 years of building a company. My afternoons walking the beach and watching fishing boats return with their daily catch. My evenings writing letters to old friends and employees who'd supported me through the difficulties. The Maria Santiago Foundation was funding 3 cancer research projects at universities across the country. The Employee Ownership Trust at Meridian was showing record profits and expanding into new markets. 850 families were building secure retirements through their shared ownership. Some endings are really beginnings. I kept no photographs of Victoria, Marcus, or Grace anywhere in the cottage. No mementos of our family life together. No reminders of the years I'd spent believing that generosity would inspire gratitude. Because I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. I had recovered something worth preserving: my self-respect and my peace of mind. But I kept 1 photograph on the small table beside my reading chair. Maria and me at the Meridian Manufacturing groundbreaking ceremony in 1995. She was wearing a yellow hard hat and work boots, smiling at the camera while holding architectural plans we'd reviewed together the night before. The woman who really built this empire with me. The partner who understood that success meant service, not exploitation. The mother who would have taught our children the difference between earning respect and demanding it. Sometimes I wondered what she would have thought about my decisions, about the employee ownership structure, about the charitable foundation bearing her name, about my choice to forgive my children financially while rejecting their behavior permanently. I thought she would have approved of the employee ownership plan. She would have loved seeing working families benefit from the company's continued success. She would have understood that true legacy isn't about family control, but about community impact. That evening, I wrote letters to my former family, not to reconcile or explain, but to close the relationship permanently and with dignity. 2 sentences that would explain everything they needed to understand about respect, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. 3 separate letters to 3 separate addresses in 3 different states where they'd relocated after their legal and financial collapse. But there was one more surprise they would receive with those letters. One final demonstration of the difference between character and resentment. The letters were delivered by certified mail on the same Tuesday morning in March. Marcus, in his rental apartment in Portland, where he was working as a manufacturing consultant for small businesses. Grace, in her shared apartment in Charlotte, where she was teaching business classes at a community college. Victoria, in her subsidized housing unit in Tampa, where she was working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. Each envelope contained the same 2 items, a brief letter and a cashier's check. The letter read, "Respect cannot be taken, only given. You taught me that love without respect is worthless, so I chose respect without love." The cashier's check was for $50,000 each, not charity, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just enough money to disappear with dignity, to start over somewhere else with clean credit and clear consciences, to build new lives through their own effort rather than attempting to steal mine. The check came with one legal condition, a signed agreement never to contact me again, never to use the Russell name in any professional capacity, never to claim association with Meridian Manufacturing or the Santiago family legacy. The final severance from people who had severed themselves from family loyalty through their own choices. I wanted them gone, not destroyed, exiled, not executed, separated, not suffering permanently, because I wasn't them, because Maria would have wanted mercy rather than vengeance, because the most powerful response to betrayal is demonstrating the character they lacked. 3 months later, Richard Crenshaw called with an update on their situations. All 3 of them cashed the checks and signed the separation agreements without attempting to negotiate different terms. Different states, different names, different lives. Marcus moved to Oregon and started a small consulting business helping local manufacturers improve efficiency. He's using his middle name professionally and seems to be building a legitimate reputation. Grace relocated to North Carolina and accepted a teaching position at a community college business program. She's publishing articles about ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. Victoria moved to Florida and found work with a small accounting firm. She's living quietly and appears to have learned from the experience. "Good," I said, watching pelicans dive for fish outside my kitchen window. "That's what I hoped would happen." "Santiago, I have to ask, why give them the money? After everything they put you through, after the betrayal and the theft and the attempted coup?" I considered his question while watching the endless movement of waves against the shore. Because I'm not them. Because Maria would have wanted me to choose restoration over revenge. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show someone what they could have been. The criminal charges were dropped in exchange for the restitution payments and permanent exile agreements. The civil lawsuit was settled with the separation terms. The asset recovery proceedings were completed with the financial arrangements. Justice had been served, not through destruction but through accountability, not through hatred but through consequences, not through permanent punishment but through permanent separation. But the broader consequences continued rippling through our industry and community. Meridian Manufacturing under employee ownership became a case study in corporate governance and worker empowerment. Business schools used our transition as an example of stakeholder capitalism done right. The employees who now own the company implemented improvements I never would have considered. They redesigned production workflows based on their daily experience. They developed customer service innovations that increased satisfaction ratings. They created safety protocols that reduced workplace injuries by 60%. Ownership motivated them differently than employment ever had. They cared about long-term sustainability rather than short-term profits. They invested in equipment maintenance rather than deferring it. They cross-trained each other to improve flexibility and job security. The company's reputation grew stronger every quarter. Our customer retention improved from 91% to 97%. Our employee turnover dropped to less than 3% annually. Our profit margins increased while our prices remained competitive. Marcus, Grace, and Victoria had been wrong about everything. Wrong about my outdated vision. Wrong about the need for modernization. Wrong about their superior business judgment. The workers who built the company with their hands understood its value, better than the family members who'd planned to steal it with legal manipulation. Maria would have been proud of what the company became. She would have loved seeing 850 families benefit from shared ownership. She would have understood that this was always the right way to honor the people who made success possible. True legacy isn't about family control. It's about community impact. It's about creating something that serves others rather than something that serves yourself. The industry publications tracked our success story for 2 years after the ownership transition. Employee-owned manufacturer outperforms corporate competitors. Worker ownership drives innovation and efficiency. Family business betrayal leads to community empowerment. Our story became a model for other family businesses struggling with succession planning and generational conflicts. Several companies contacted Richard Crenshaw about implementing similar ownership transitions, but I wanted no part of that consulting business. I wanted no credit for accidentally discovering the right solution. I wanted no recognition for making the best of a terrible family situation. I had found my peace in the cottage overlooking the ocean. I had found my purpose in supporting cancer research through Maria's foundation. I had found my satisfaction in knowing that 850 families were building secure futures through shared ownership. The phone calls from journalists stopped after 6 months. The interview requests from business schools were declined politely. The speaking invitations from industry conferences were refused consistently. I wasn't interested in fame for surviving betrayal. I wasn't interested in credit for choosing forgiveness over revenge. I wasn't interested in being an example of anything except living quietly and well. Sometimes the most powerful victory is walking away from the battlefield entirely. Sometimes the greatest success is disappearing from the story you helped create. My former family learned to build their own lives without stealing from mine. The company employees learned to prosper through shared ownership rather than individual exploitation. The community learned that businesses could serve workers instead of using them. Everyone learned something valuable from our family's destruction and reconstruction, including me. I learned that love without respect is manipulation, that generosity without boundaries is enabling, that family loyalty must be mutual, or it becomes exploitation by people who share your genetics but not your values. I learned that true wealth isn't money in the bank, but sleeping peacefully knowing you lived with integrity. That real power isn't controlling other people, but controlling your own responses to their behavior. I learned that the best revenge against people who try to steal your dignity is maintaining it regardless of their actions. That the most devastating response to betrayal is demonstrating the character they lack. Most importantly, I learned that some relationships are worth preserving and others are worth ending cleanly. That cutting ties with toxic people, even family members, can be an act of love for yourself and mercy for them. The cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean provided everything I needed: solitude without loneliness, simplicity without poverty, peace without boredom, books to read, letters to write, walks to take, sunsets to watch, no board meetings to attend, no family drama to manage, no trust to rebuild with people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy. Just the rhythm of waves and the cry of seagulls and the satisfaction of having handled the worst crisis of my life with dignity intact. Maria would have been proud of how I ended our story, with justice served and mercy offered, with consequences delivered and forgiveness extended, with respect maintained and peace achieved. The company we built together continued prospering under employee ownership. The foundation bearing in her name continued funding cancer research. The family that betrayed us continued building new lives in distant states. Everything worked out exactly as it should have. 5 years later, I received a letter that surprised me. Not from my former family, they had honored the separation agreement completely, but from Marcus and Grace's children, my grandchildren I hadn't seen since their parents' destruction. Emma was 12 now, David was 10. They had grown up hearing some version of the family story, probably carefully edited to minimize their parents' culpability. But children understand more than adults realize about fairness, consequences, and character. The letter was written in Emma's careful handwriting. Dear Grandpa Santiago, we know what our parents did was wrong. We know you had to protect yourself and your workers. We hope someday you might want to meet us again. We promise we're learning to earn things instead of expecting them. David had added his own note. I'm sorry our family hurt you. I want to build things with my hands like you did. Maybe you could teach me someday if you want to. I sat in my cottage reading their words while watching fishing boats return with the evening catch. These children were growing up with parents who'd learned hard lessons about character and consequences. They were being raised by people who'd discovered the value of honest work and earned respect. Maybe there was hope for the next generation. Maybe the family name could be redeemed through their choices, rather than destroyed by their parents' mistakes. I wrote back to Emma and David that same evening. Not a long letter, but an honest one. I explained that forgiveness and reconciliation were different things, that I harbored no hatred for their parents, but couldn't risk trusting them again, that they were welcome to build their own relationship with me based on their own character. Your parents made choices that ended our relationship, I wrote, but you get to make different choices that could start a new one. If you want to learn about building things that last, I have plenty to teach you. If you want to understand the difference between earning respect and demanding it, I can show you examples. But understand this, I will never again give my trust to people who haven't proven they deserve it. You would need to earn my respect through your actions, not inherit it through your genetics. I included photos of the employee-owned Meridian Manufacturing and articles about the Maria Santiago Foundation. This is what your grandmother and I built together. This is what your parents tried to steal. This is what 850 families now own because they earned it. The letter ended with an invitation. If you want to visit the cottage where I live now, you're welcome anytime. But come because you choose to, not because your parents suggest it. Come because you're curious about your grandfather, not because you want something from him. Emma and David visited 3 months later, accompanied by Marcus, but not entering the cottage with him. He waited in the car while his children knocked on my door, respecting the separation agreement while allowing them to make their own choices. We spent the afternoon walking the beach and talking about their dreams. Emma wanted to study marine biology and protect ocean environments. David wanted to learn welding and build things that help people. Neither of them asked for money or advantages or special treatment. They asked for stories about their grandmother Maria and advice about working hard for things they wanted. I taught David how to identify different types of wood and metal. I showed Emma how to observe tide patterns and bird behaviors. We built a small driftwood sculpture together using materials the ocean had provided and tools I'd bought at the local hardware store. When Marcus came to collect them, he thanked me from a distance, but didn't approach the cottage. He understood the boundaries. He respected the consequences. He was allowing his children to build something he had destroyed. That evening, I added a codicil to my will. Emma and David would inherit the cottage and a modest education fund when they turned 18, assuming they continued demonstrating character and work ethic. True wealth is sleeping peacefully, knowing you lived with honor. They're learning that lesson early. They'll understand it better than their parents ever did. The tide was coming in, washing the beach clean for tomorrow's possibilities. If this story hit you like it hit me, subscribe for more true stories about family, betrayal, and the price of justice. And check out my playlist about toxic family dynamics, because Santiago's story isn't unique. Thanks for listening, and remember, respect is earned, not inherited.